Dawn broke in a bleached-out whisper instead of a shout. Even after 16 years of living beneath the cracked sky, Calyx still expected dawn to feel warm, but the sun no longer remembered how. The great flare had torn a gaping hole through the ionosphere, and ever since, daylight arrived like a surgeon's lamp. Clinical, lidless, too bright to carry heat. It also stripped memories, flensing them away grain by grain, unless a mind had once been sealed in a bunker of leaded stone or plastic doped with silver salts. Calyx's father, Hall Vey, was one of the shielded. He'd been inside the lab at Otega Station when the flare erupted and so still held whole decades in his head. But Calyx had been utero-born 3 weeks later, in a shattered world where unprotected memories evaporated overnight. Each morning, Calyx woke knowing only what was written on flesh or parchment the evening before. Without daily revision, the past blurred into dream static, as impermanent as frost on glass. That was why the whale scribes existed. Calyx stood on the stony ridge overlooking Bazin-10 and watched the newest carcass drift into place. The beast had been a blue whale in old taxonomy, though the sun's rage had bleached its hide the color of bone. Once alive, it must have weighed 100 tons. Now, bloated with rot gas, it bobbed in the brackish water like a funerary barge, ribs jutting beneath skin, stretched thin as parchment. 4 iron anchors, hammered into vertebrae, held it from floating away. Scribes hustled along the floating scaffold that surrounded the body, carrying baskets of ink and bone needles. Every day the colony's waking memories were summarized, judged, condensed, and then tattooed into the whale's hide before nightfall. The following sunrise, those same scribes would decipher their own work to remind themselves who they were, whom they loved, and what they still fought for. It was a grim rhythm, a dance with putrefaction and forgetfulness, but it worked well enough for 16 years. Hall strode up beside Calyx. His gray hair shimmered with salt crystals. He wore the leather-wrapped mnemonic circlet that marked a keeper, someone who carried unbroken timelines in his skull. "You're late," he said. "Orientation begins at first light." Calyx let the accusation slide. He had no real choice about today. By rule, a child of the shielded must attempt the apprenticeship, at least once. Otherwise, the colony lost too much continuity when the elder keepers died. "I'm here now," he replied, and started downhill, boots skidding on shale. Past the tide line, the smell hit, sweet rot mixed with antiseptic ink. Dozens of scribes swarmed across the whale's flank, chattering clipped phrases they had memorized moments before. Captain Navi, overseer of script, lifted a gloved hand when she saw them approach. A ring of fresh scar tissue encircled her right forearm, the place she'd excised last week when a fungal bloom rendered part of the archive unreadable. Flesh pages decayed as readily as any other organic matter. "Calyx Vey," Navi said. "Take station near the left pectoral fin. You'll be copying an echo script." "I thought apprentices began with primer marks," Calyx replied. Navi gave a thin smile. "We're short on hands. A scavenger clan raided Basin 6, stole 2 ribs full of Year 11 history. We must redundantly scribe the lost data before tonight's forget. Echo script doubles density." Calyx swallowed. Echo script wound around itself like braided vines. One slip produced illegible knots. "I understand." "Good." She beckoned to a stocky boy already inked to the elbows. "Reeve will brief you while you prep." Reeve led Calyx to a platform beside the whale's massive fin. The creature's eye socket gaped open, a dark archway into its skull. Calyx busied himself stirring ink, lamp black, bone char, and stabilizers, while Reeve spoke rapidly, as if trying to outrun twilight. Every section has anchor phrases. Today we're burning in two events: the water engine failure in Dome 3, and the discovery of living algae under Glacier Rift. Use triglyphs for names, tetraglyphs for locations. You do know triglyphs? I learned them yesterday, Calix said, though yesterday meant only that he had read the primer in the hour before sleep. Memory retention was always strongest for the final waking act. Reeve nodded. Right. Carve shallow, drive ink, cauterize, and mind the gases. When those blubber pockets burst, newbies sometimes puke into the incision channels. Doesn't help legibility. Calix gripped the bone needle, took a deep breath, and touched whale skin. It felt cooler than expected, almost rubbery. He incised the first glyph, a long loop representing the colony itself. Ink bled into the cut, blooming like night bloom flowers. He followed with the triglyph for Dome 3, then the date, day 6144 post-flare. As he worked, he slipped into a trance of lines and angles. The sun climbed until its ultraviolet lash laid a harsh glare across the platform, but everyone continued, gloved fingers nimble despite rising heat. Somewhere above, gulls that no longer remembered how to migrate circled in hungry, dazed spirals. A sudden hiss made Calix jerk his needle. A gas bubble ruptured near Reeve's station, spattering oily fluid. Reeve cursed, but kept carving. Calix dabbed at the smudge, streaking his own glyph. The ink was salvageable, he decided, and moved on. Time was tyrant now. They had until dusk. By midday, the wind changed, bringing a sour stench from the east. Shadows flitted across the basin. Kites or raiders, Calix couldn't tell. Then a conch horn sounded thrice from the watchtower on the ridge. Raiders. Panic surged along the scaffolds. Novice strode to the central spine and bellowed, "Hold positions. Archive is priority. Keepers to me." Calix's pulse thudded. Basin 6's fate echoed in every mind. Ribs hacked free. 12 years of memory lost. Families unsure afterward if their children were truly theirs. Raiders sold history like spice to the highest bidder. Some clans even burned the flesh scrolls to erase proof of atrocities. Hall, wearing his keeper circlet, vaulted onto the whale's back. "Shield your minds," he commanded. "Eye lenses down." Apprentices pulled smoked glass over their faces to blunt direct solar rays. The ultraviolet accelerated memory decay under stress. Calix continued carving, though his hand trembled. The approaching shadowcraft, ragged sail sleds propelled by thermals, skimmed over the Dead Sea. Hook lines dangled, ready to latch onto the whale. A percussion shot rang from the ridge. One sled veered, sail ripping. Another kept coming. Navi nodded to the torch team. Jets of ignited whale gas roared skyward, creating fiery curtains around the carcass. The raiders hesitated, but two lines found purchase on the aft scaffolds, and figures in patchwork armor swung aboard. Metal clanged. A scribe screamed. Calix finished the glyph he was on, then looked up. A raider charged along the platform, machete high. Hall intercepted him, parrying with a hooked pole meant for flipping blubber sheets. The raider misjudged footing, slipped on slime, and tumbled into the brown waves below. Yet more boarded. One kicked over ink bowls, smearing crucial lines. Calix blocked a boot from hitting his section, elbowed the attacker's knee, and shoved him against the pectoral fin. Wild instinct, not memory, guided his motion. He stabbed the bone needle into the raider's thigh. The man howled and retreated. Then something worse. Smoke from a flare grenade billowed across the whale, lavender plumes that reeked of phosphorus. Phosphorus destroyed skin integrity, made tattooed lines slough off. Raiders meant to raze the archive entirely. "Reeve!" Calix shouted. "We have to seal the section!" Reeve met his gaze, comprehension flaring behind soot-masked goggles. Together, they yanked a tarp of resin-soaked linen from supply crates and pressed it against the fresh tattoos. The cloth adhered, bonding with a chemical that accelerated keratinization. It would protect the writing at least for a few hours. A sudden weight slammed Calyx to the deck. A raider knelt on his back, grinding him into slime. Calyx's mask cracked. He tasted salt and bile. "Pretty scars you've got," the raider hissed. "Let's open them." There was a whip-crack sound. The raider convulsed and fell. Hall stood behind him holding a bolt thrower. He hauled his son upright. "Live, boy," he muttered. "I can't forget you, but you can still forget me." In minutes, the defenders forced a retreat. 2 sleds drifted burning on the horizon. Scribes hauled the dead overboard, bodies sliding into brown water like broken puppets. Navi limped along the spine, ankle bleeding through her boot. "Inventory damage," she barked. Calyx was already checking. His echo column sustained only minor smears. Across the flank, however, whole swaths were blackened where phosphorus had eaten flesh. Days 82 through 84. Post-flare gone. Reeve cursed. "That's when we learned to trap condensation. Without that, tomorrow we won't remember how to drink." "Not all is lost," Hall said. He touched his circlet. "I remember those days. We can scribe them anew tonight." The crisis subsided, but the sun already angled westward. Dusk would erase unshielded minds in a slow dissolve. Work accelerated. Scribes shouted reminders to themselves as they moved. Condensation traps, tapered channels. "Nitrate purge on the water engine." They seared these phrases into cuts, praying that morning eyes could decode them. Calyx labored until light turned amber, then copper. His fingers cramped, ink clotted. Still he pushed on, glyph after glyph, cross-referencing with Hall's spoken recollections. At final bell, when Navy struck a rusted railway spar, the scribes staggered off the platforms. Sealants applied, torches doused, watchmen posted. Night fell. In the barracks dug into the chalk bluff, Calyx washed blood and ink from his hands. The reflection in the tin mirror showed a tired stranger. Every evening was a confrontation with unfamiliarity. "Who are you tonight? Will you know in the morning?" He approached Hall, who sat by a low electric lantern transcribing spoken notes onto rice paper. Hall's handwriting was fluid, confident. Memory anchored his every line. "Did I do well?" Calyx asked. "You did," Hall replied. "You fought, you wrote, you adapted. But tomorrow you won't remember that, and I might not be here to remind you." Calyx opened his mouth to object, but Hall raised a palm. "Listen." He pulled a small lead-lined pouch from his coat. Inside lay a thin foil cap, dotted with micro-scale electrodes. "A cognister," Calyx whispered. Only 8 existed in the colony. They could store a snapshot of neural patterns and replay them at dawn, granting temporary continuity to the unshielded. The process hurt and degraded after repeated use, but it was the closest thing to real memory most would ever know. "Put it on," Hull said. "Consider it an inheritance." Calyx's chest tightened. "You need it." "What if—" "I am shielded by birthright," Hull replied. "My mind holds steady. But soon, leadership must pass to those who can bridge both worlds. You've shown the heart to try." He positioned the cap on Calyx's scalp. Cold terminals bit skin. "Close your eyes." A soft hum, then a bloom of white noise. Calyx's thoughts fluttered, pages riffled by wind. When Hall removed the cap, Calyx felt drained, but strangely lucid. "Sleep," Hall said. Calyx lay on his cot. Lanterns dimmed. Around him, scribes murmured final self-reminders. "Mother's name is Selah. The algae grow green under red light. Then silence. Dreams came, a sky ablaze, a whale singing without lungs, letters crawling like ants across pale sand. He woke to morning sun, glaring through slit windows. The usual fog of amnesia pressed against his mind, but this time it met resistance. Images snapped into focus. The raiders, the phosphorus smoke, Hall's bolt thrower, the cognister. With a gasp, Calix sat up. He remembered. Hall was gone. Calix ran outside. Down by the basin, activity churned. Scribes crowding the whale, confusion blooming like algae. He grabbed Reeve. "What's wrong?" "Keeper Hall took a skimmer at dawn," Reeve said. "Left a note. Erase the past or we perish." Then he sabotaged the ridge guns. No one can stop him. Calix's stomach clenched. "Erase the past?" Novi appeared, eyes blazing. "Your father has always argued that memory is the colony's anchor and its chain. He claims clinging to yesterday prevents adaptation, breeds stagnation. Now he intends to sink the archive, cut the whale loose, drag it beyond the current into the vent mouth. There, acid vents will dissolve every word." Calix reeled. Hall, the steadfast keeper, planning erasure. But he remembered Hall's face last night, the sorrow in his eyes. "Live, boy. You can still forget me." A dreadful idea formed. Hall meant to sacrifice himself so the colony could start anew, free of errors fossilized in whale skin. His circlet, carrying 16 intact years, would vanish with him. Reeve shook Calix. "We have maybe an hour before the whale reaches open current. Without the ridge guns, we can't chase with skiffs. You're the only one who remembers his patterns, his roots. What do we do?" Calix stared at the drifting hulk. Its anchors had been cut. Tether ropes trailed like entrails. Scribes screamed from shore, powerless. The cognistor's clarity still pulsed in Calix's veins. He made a decision. "Launch kite sleds," he said. "3 of them. We can parasail ahead of the current, board near the vent mouth, and re-anchor." Novi frowned. "Even if you reach him, he's your father. Can you stop him?" Calix surprised himself with the steadiness of his reply. "If memory must burn, let us choose which pages, not the whole book." He turned to Reeve. "Gather 2 volunteers. We leave in 10 minutes." The kite sleds, light frames with patchwork sails, whooshed across salt flats and lifted over the sea. Calix steered the lead craft, sun stabbing his eyes. The whale was a pale island drifting toward distant steam pillars that fumed where acidic waters boiled from Earth's cracked crust. Wind buffeted. The sled caught up within 40 minutes. Calix leaped, landed on a scaffold that still clung to the carcass. Boards creaked. Hall stood near the blowhole, cutting the last support beams with a thermal saw. His circlet glinted. "Father!" Calix shouted. Hall stopped. Sweat streaked his lined face. "You remember," he murmured, almost pleased. "Then the cognister worked." "It did," Calix said, "which proves there's a middle path. We can augment memory without enslaving ourselves to it." Hall shook his head. "You did not live the years before the flare. Humanity's trust in recorded certainty bred complacency, entitlement. Now we cling to dead whales because we're afraid of blank pages. Better a species that wakes each day new, forced to imagine, than one trapped eternally in yesterday's mistakes." Calix stepped closer. The other 2 volunteers anchored ropes silently behind him. Steam pillars loomed less than a kilometer away. "There's wisdom in shedding weight," Calix conceded. "But selective amnesia is surgery, not amputation. Keep the knowledge of water engines, of medicine, of languages, but ditch the grudges, the dogma. Help me do this right." Hall's gaze flicked to the volunteers, then to the sea's roiling maw. In an hour, this carcass will dissolve, he said softly. Your choice must be now. Stop me, or cut free and fly home. Calyx reached into his coat, produced a fresh bone needle. I choose to write. He knelt and inked a single glyph into the whale's hide, a doubled spiral, symbol for continuance through change. Then he pressed the needle into Hall's palm. Your turn. Tattoo the whale or tattoo me. Decide which skin carries the story. Hall's hand trembled. Memories flickered behind his eyes. Calyx could almost see them. The day of the flare, the first dead whales, the first successful distillation of potable water. Hall looked at the vent mouth again, steam-churning clouds, and exhaled. Stubborn boy, he whispered. You refuse to forget. Not anymore, Calyx said. Slowly, Hall knelt. He cut a line beside his son's glyph, then another, and a third, forming the ideographic root for seed. If we must plant anew, he said, let's plant in living flesh, not dead. Calyx nodded. The volunteers scrambled to reattach 2 anchors severed earlier. The kite sleds turned into tugs, their sails bridged with rope. Together, they towed the whale out of the dangerous current, back toward the basin. Hours later, under a bleeding sunset, the carcass floated once more within safe anchorage. Scribes cheered. Novice wept openly as she inspected the intact sections. Some had water damage, but most words survived. That night, Hall relinquished his circlet before the council. He would remain Keeper Emeritus, but with limited vote. The colony authorized an experiment. Distribute the cognistors on rotation, giving every citizen periodic continuity. Meanwhile, smaller portable archives, tattooed on cultivated pigskin that could be rebound like books, would supplement the whales. No single point of failure again. Calyx recorded the day's events on the whale's brow, careful, deliberate strokes. Day 6145, post-flare. The colony remembered choice. He included the raid, the near erasure, the shared resolve. Last, he inked the doubled spiral in the seed glyph. He finished at midnight. Stars burned overhead, still indifferent. But somewhere under that indifferent sky drifted a pale leviathan, inscribed with fragile, obstinate hope. As he stepped off the scaffold, Calyx touched his temple, where the cognister would rest come dawn. For the first time, he wondered what it might feel like. Not merely to remember the past, but to remember tomorrow as well.